What happens when the life you built, the home you furnished with love, and the man you pledged your future to are all stolen from you in a single, heart-shattering moment? For Eleanor Vance. 8 months pregnant and standing in a torrential downpour, that nightmare became a reality. Locked out of her own multi-million-dollar mansion, she could only watch as another woman, a cunning, beautiful rival, prepared to walk down the aisle and marry her husband. Everyone believed Eleanor was the past, a forgotten chapter. They all thought the father of her unborn child had abandoned her. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed he would never come back. This is the story of how a woman's world was destroyed by a devastating betrayal and the shocking truth that returned from the edge of the world to change everything. The rain was a cold, relentless mockery. It plastered Eleanor Vance's brown hair to her cheeks and soaked through her thin maternity blouse, chilling her to the bone. But the cold was nothing compared to the ice that had taken root in her soul. She stood before the imposing wrought iron gates of her own home, the home she and Julian had bought 2 years ago, the sprawling Atherton mansion they were supposed to fill with the laughter of their children. Her child. The one she could feel kicking restlessly beneath her heart right now, as if sensing its mother's distress. Her knuckles were raw from banging on the intercom, her voice hoarse from screaming Julian's name into the unfeeling speaker. Nothing. The only response was the hiss of the rain on the slick asphalt and the rustle of the ancient oak trees that lined the long, curving driveway. Just 3 weeks ago, Julian Croft, her brilliant, ambitious husband, had kissed her goodbye at the airport. His geological engineering firm had landed a massive career-defining contract, a deep earth survey in a remote mountainous region of Patagonia. 2 months, Ellie, that's all. He had promised, his hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. There'll be almost no signal, so don't panic if you don't hear from me for a week at a time. I'll be dreaming of you and our little one. When I get back, we'll be set for life. I'll be all yours. She had trusted him. Of course she had. Their love story was one for the ages, a whirlwind romance that had blossomed into a deep, tender partnership. Julian was her rock, her champion. The first week had been silent, as expected. The second week, a pre-scheduled automated email arrived, thinking of you. Everything is on track. Love you both. It was sterile, but it was something. But then the third week came, and her world tilted on its axis. Her credit cards were declined. A terse email from Julian's personal assistant, a woman Eleanor had never liked, informed her that Mr. Croft had initiated a restructuring of his personal finances, and that all joint assets were temporarily frozen. Confused and scared, Eleanor had driven to his downtown office only to be politely but firmly denied entry by security. Panic had begun to set in. Today, it had exploded. A courier had delivered a thick, cream-colored envelope to the small art studio she kept in town. Inside was a wedding invitation. Isabella Ricci and Julian Croft request the honor of your presence at the celebration of their union. The date was this Saturday, just 4 days away. The venue, their home, the Atherton mansion, which brought her here shivering in the rain, locked out of her own life. The security code had been changed. The locks were new. A large white marquee was being erected on the back lawn, its pristine canvas a stark white flag of surrender in the gray deluge. Suddenly, the grand oak front door of the mansion swung open. A figure silhouetted against the warm golden light from within stepped out onto the porch, an umbrella held elegantly above her head. It was Isabella Ricci. Isabella was Julian's business partner, a woman as sharp and polished as a shard of obsidian. Eleanor had always felt a tremor of unease around her. Her ambition was a palpable, almost predatory force, but Julian had always laughed it off. "She's ruthless in the boardroom, Ellie, which is why we're so successful. It's just business." Isabella glided down the stone steps, her designer heels clicking with an unnerving confidence. She stopped just inside the gates, looking Eleanor up and down with an expression that mingled pity and triumph. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "you're making a scene. You should go home." "This is my home." Eleanor's voice cracked. "What is this, Isabella? What is going on? Where is Julian?" Isabella sighed, a theatrical display of patience. "Julian has moved on. He realized he made a mistake. Our partnership was always more than just business, and being away from the domesticity gave him clarity. He wants a partner who is his equal, not a hobbyist." She gestured vaguely at Eleanor's bump. "Or a dependent." The cruelty of the words stole Eleanor's breath. "That's a lie. He loves me. He loves this baby." "Does he?" Isabella smiled, a chilling, razor-thin line. "He signed over power of attorney to me before he left Eleanor. He gave me control of everything. His finances, his properties, his life. Does that sound like a man planning to come back to you?" She held up her left hand, and even in the dim light, the diamond that sparkled on her ring finger was obscene. It was a new ring, larger and colder than the one Julian had given Eleanor. "Security!" Isabella called out, not even looking back at the house. Two burly men in black suits emerged from a small guardhouse by the gate. "Please escort Miss Vance off the property. She's trespassing." "You can't do this!" Eleanor cried, tears finally mixing with the rain on her face. "This is my house, my baby's home!" The men took her arms, gently but firmly. The humiliation was a physical blow winding her. As they led her away from the gates, back toward the street, Isabella delivered her final devastating blow. "He's asked me to tell you he'll provide a generous settlement for the baby's sake," she called after her. "Once you sign the divorce papers, of course. My lawyer will be in touch. Oh, and Eleanor, don't try to contact him. His satellite phone is for business and emergency use only, and as you can see, I am handling both." The gates swung shut with a heavy metallic clang, a sound of finality that echoed the slamming door of her life. Defeated, drenched, and carrying the child of a man who had seemingly erased her from existence, Eleanor Vance stumbled away into the rain with nowhere to go. Her fairy tale had become a horror story, and the villain was sleeping in her bed. The next 24 hours were a blur of shock and cold, creeping despair. Eleanor ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind with flickering neon signs and the lingering scent of stale coffee. She paid for the room with the last $200 she had in her purse. Huddled under a thin, scratchy blanket, she stared at the water-stained ceiling, her mind a frantic vortex of unanswerable questions. How could Julian do this? The man who whispered poetry to her in the mornings, who had cried with joy when they saw their baby's first sonogram, who had spent an entire weekend assembling a crib with his own hands, it didn't make sense. It felt wrong. It was a betrayal so complete, so monstrous that it felt like a fiction. But the facts were undeniable. The locked gates, the new ring on Isabella's finger, the frozen accounts, the cold corporate dismissal from a man she loved. Her first instinct was to call his parents Margaret and Robert Croft, but she hesitated. They were old-money traditionalists who valued strength and success above all else. They had always been polite to Eleanor, but she suspected they saw her an artist with a modest background as a sweet but unsuitable match for their high-flying son. Isabella, with her ruthless corporate acumen and family pedigree, was exactly the kind of daughter-in-law they would have chosen. They would surely take Julian's side, or rather the side Isabella presented to them. There was only one person she could turn to. Her fingers still trembling dialed the number of her oldest friend, Chloe Davies. Chloe was a bulldog of a litigator, a woman whose compassion was matched only by her ferocity. She answered on the second ring. "Ellie, what's wrong? You sound awful." Through hiccuping sobs, Eleanor told her everything. The lockout, Isabella, the wedding invitation, the power of attorney. Chloe listened in stunned silence, punctuated only by sharp intakes of breath and muttered curses. "Stay right where you are," Chloe commanded when Eleanor finished. "Send me the address. I'm coming to get you. Do not talk to anyone. Do not sign anything. Just sit tight." An hour later, Chloe burst into the drab motel room, bringing with her the scent of rain-soaked leather and a powerful aura of control. She took one look at Eleanor's pale face and tear-swollen eyes and enveloped her in a fierce hug. "Okay," Chloe said, switching into lawyer mode as she pulled back. "First, you're coming home with me. Second, we fight. This stinks to high heaven, Ellie." "But what can we do?" Eleanor whispered, her voice raw. "He gave her power of attorney. It's all legal. He wants this." "I don't believe that," Chloe said, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Not for a second. Julian can be ambitious and a bit of a fool sometimes, but he's not a monster. A man doesn't abandon his 8 months pregnant wife via a proxy unless something is very, very wrong. Isabella is playing a game, and we need to figure out the rules." At Chloe's apartment, wrapped in a warm robe and sipping a cup of chamomile tea, Eleanor felt a tiny flicker of hope ignite in the darkness. Chloe's apartment was a sanctuary of order and logic, a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed Eleanor's life. Chloe sat at her dining table, which was now covered in papers, her laptop glowing. "Okay, let's break it down," she said, her voice crisp. "Power of attorney. A standard POA is one thing, but a durable POA that gives a business partner total control over personal assets effective immediately. That's unusual. Unless he was anticipating a coma, why would he sign something so sweeping for a 2-month trip?" "He said it was for worst-case scenarios," Eleanor recalled faintly. Isabella had the documents drawn up. She said it was standard procedure for executives on high-risk overseas projects. Julian said it was just a formality. "A formality she's using to gut your life," Chloe countered grimly. "She's isolated him. We know he's in a communication black hole in Patagonia. She controls the only official channel to him through the company. She controls the money. She controls the narrative. She's created a perfect vacuum where her word is law." Chloe began typing furiously. "She's smart. I'll give her that. She's initiated divorce proceedings on his behalf, citing irreconcilable differences. She's filed motions to have you vacate the premises, which is why she could legally lock you out. It's all under the authority of the POA. It's a house of cards, Ellie, but it's a legally sound one. As long as Julian is out of the picture." "So, we have to contact him," Eleanor said, a new urgency in her voice. "We have to." "Exactly," Chloe agreed. "But how Isabella has his company locked down? Trying to go through official channels will just alert her. We need a back door." For hours, they brainstormed, digging through old emails, photos, and documents. They tried to find names of other team members on the Patagonia project, but the personnel list was classified as proprietary company information. Isabella, had thought of everything. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of gray and lavender, Eleanor felt exhaustion and despair creeping back in. She was staring blankly at a photo on her phone, one taken the week before Julian left. They were in the half-finished nursery. Julian was on his knees, laughing, covered in pale yellow paint, and she was standing over him, her hand on her belly. Something clicked in her memory. A small, seemingly insignificant conversation. "Ellie," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "The project. Julian was worried about it. He said it was incredibly complex and that Isabella was pushing the timeline too aggressively. He said he was only comfortable going because his man on the ground would be there." Chloe looked up from her laptop, her eyes alert. "His man on the ground, who?" "I don't know his name," Eleanor said, frustrated. "Julian just called him his ace in the hole. A guy he trusted implicitly. An old friend from his university days, another geologist. He said if anything goes sideways, Marcus will know what to do. He's the only one out there who doesn't drink Isabella's Kool-Aid." "Marcus," Chloe repeated, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Okay, that's a start. Marcus, a geologist, friend of Julian's from university." It was a needle in a haystack, but it was the first real thread they had. For the next several hours, Chloe cross-referenced university alumni networks with professional geology associations and employee manifests from Julian's previous companies. The sun was high in the sky when she finally let out a triumphant shout. "Got him, Marcus Thorne! He's listed as a senior consultant on the Patagonia Deep Core Initiative. He's not a direct employee of Julian's firm. He's an independent contractor. That means Isabella might not have the same level of control over him." The problem remained how to contact him in one of the most remote places on Earth. "We can't," Chloe said, her face grim. "Not directly. But," she added, a slow smile spreading across her face, "I've found the satellite communications provider they're using. A private firm out of Houston. Their emergency protocols are ironclad. They won't pass on a message to a specific person without a high-level corporate directive." "So it's a dead end," Eleanor sighed. "No," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming with defiant energy. "It's a wall, and I'm a lawyer. My job is to find cracks in walls." She picked up her phone. "I think it's time to make a friend at the FCC and talk about international satellite transmission regulations. It's a long shot, Ellie, but it's a shot." For the first time in days, Eleanor felt a surge of adrenaline that wasn't born of fear. It was the thrill of the fight. They had a name. They had a plan. The wedding was in 3 days. The clock was ticking. While Eleanor and Chloe were searching for a lifeline, Isabella Ricci was cementing her victory. She moved through the Atherton mansion not as a guest or a usurper, but as its rightful queen. The staff who had adored the kind and unassuming Eleanor now moved about with a hushed tension, terrified of their new mistress. Isabella was a micromanager of breathtaking arrogance. She had Eleanor's personal art and photographs boxed up and stored in the dampest corner of the cellar. She replaced the warm, earth-toned decor with cold, minimalist furniture in shades of chrome and black. The house was being systematically stripped of Eleanor's soul and redecorated in the image of a corporate boardroom. Her first morning as the sole lady of the house, she summoned the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman in her late 60s who had worked for Julian's family for over 30 years. Martha, Isabella, began not bothering to use her proper name. "The standards in this house have become lax. From now on, I will be approving all menus a week in advance. Staff will address me as Miss Ricci until Saturday, at which point I will become Mrs. Croft." "Is that understood?" "Yes, Miss Ricci," Mrs. Gable murmured, her eyes fixed on the floor. "And what about about Eleanor?" Isabella's smile was thin and dangerous. Mr. Croft's former wife is no longer a concern of this household. Any communication with her by any member of staff will be considered a breach of contract and grounds for immediate dismissal without references. I trust I'm making myself clear. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Mrs. Gable, whose entire life was tied to her position, could only nod in silent, resentful compliance. Isabella's most important task that day was managing Margaret Croft. She had invited her future mother-in-law for lunch, orchestrating a scene of domestic bliss and serene control. Margaret arrived, her posture as rigid as her pearl necklace. She was a woman who valued appearances and stability, and the sudden dissolution of her son's marriage was a deep crack in her carefully curated world. Isabella. Margaret said, her tone cool as she accepted a glass of iced tea. This is all so sudden. I confess I'm finding it difficult to understand. Julian and Eleanor seemed perfectly happy. Isabella placed a comforting hand on Margaret's arm, her face a mask of sorrowful sincerity. I know this is a shock, Margaret. It was for me, too. The truth is, Julian has been unhappy for a long time. Eleanor, she's a sweet girl, but she doesn't challenge him. She doesn't understand the pressures he's under. He told me he felt like he was drowning in domesticity. She let that sink in before continuing. Being away on this project gave him the space to finally be honest with himself. He realized that our partnership, our intellectual connection, was the foundation he truly wanted for his life. He called me, Isabella lied, her voice catching with practiced emotion. He was in turmoil. He asked me to handle everything to make the break as clean as possible so he could focus on the project. He wanted to come back to a new beginning. But a baby Isabella. Margaret pressed her brow, furrowed. He's abandoning his pregnant wife. He is not abandoning his child, Isabella corrected gently. He's set up a generous trust. He will absolutely provide for the baby. He just knows he cannot be the husband Eleanor needs. It would be a lie. And Julian, above all, is an honorable man. It's tearing him apart, but he's doing the hard but right thing. She skillfully reframed his desertion as a noble sacrifice. She then guided Margaret through the house, showing off the wedding preparations. The cascade of white orchids, the string quartet practicing in the garden, the 5-tiered cake sitting in the industrial kitchen. It was a spectacle of wealth and impeccable taste, designed to overwhelm and assure Margaret that this new union was one of strength and permanence. By the end of the lunch, Margaret Croft was convinced. Isabella was not a home wrecker. She was a savior, a strong woman who had stepped in to support Julian during a difficult but necessary life transition. Eleanor was now recast in her mind as a casualty of circumstance, a gentle but ultimately weak woman who couldn't keep up with her formidable son. Isabella's web of lies was intricate and strong. She had isolated Julian, neutralized his friends and family, and seized control of his empire. In her mind, the victory was already complete. The wedding on Saturday was a mere formality, a coronation. That evening alone in Julian's vast, silent office, she allowed herself a moment of pure triumph. She poured a glass of vintage scotch and swirled the amber liquid, staring at a large framed photograph on the desk. It was of Julian and Eleanor, taken on their wedding day, both of them beaming with unadulterated joy. With a flick of her wrist, Isabella opened the desk drawer, took out a new sterling silver frame containing a photo of herself and Julian at a corporate gala, and made the switch. She dropped the old photo of Eleanor into the wastebasket without a second glance. The past was now where it belonged. In the trash. What she didn't know was that miles away in the city, a quiet, determined housekeeper who had accidentally overheard Isabella's fake emotional phone call story to Margaret, was beginning to feel a dangerous seed of doubt take root. And deep in a cluttered apartment, a tenacious lawyer was on a conference call with a disgruntled satellite communications technician talking about a critical systems vulnerability that could theoretically allow a single, unauthorized text-only data packet to be routed to a specific terminal in the Patagonian mountains. A 1-in-a-million shot. The day before the wedding was a crucible of stress and fear for Eleanor. The weight of her situation pressed down on her, manifesting in a terrifying wave of Braxton Hicks contractions that were sharp and far too frequent. Alarmed, Chloe rushed her to the hospital. Lying in the sterile white room, a monitor strapped to her belly, tracking the steady, strong heartbeat of her baby, Eleanor felt a profound and terrible loneliness. This was a moment she was supposed to share with Julian. He should have been there holding her hand, his face a mask of comical panic and overwhelming love. Instead, she was with her lawyer fighting for a life he had apparently discarded. "The doctor says you and the baby are fine," Chloe said, returning to the room with a cup of water. "It's stress. He said you have to take it easy." "Take it easy," Eleanor gave a weak, humorless laugh. "My replacement is getting married in my house tomorrow, and I'm a homeless, penniless cliché. How do I take it easy?" "By focusing on what we can control," Chloe said, her voice firm and grounding. "And by believing. I spoke to my contact. The data packet went through. It was a tiny window just a few seconds before the system diagnostics would have caught it and flagged it. It's delivered. Whether Marcus Thorne sees it and what he does about it is out of our hands now. The message had been short-stripped of all emotion to fit the tiny data limit J. Croft urgent. Evance is homeless assets frozen. I, Ricci, initiated divorce. Wedding is set so at your home. This is not a joke. C. Davies, ESQ. Now, all they could do was wait. It was an agonizing, helpless feeling. Eleanor was discharged from the hospital that evening with strict orders to rest. As Chloe drove them back to her apartment, they passed a flower shop. The windows filled with extravagant bouquets of white roses and lilies. A delivery van was being loaded, and on the side a sign read, "Croft Ricci Wedding." The sight sent a fresh stab of pain through Eleanor's heart. It was all so real. The world was moving on, celebrating the union that was built on the ashes of her life. Maybe we're wrong, Chloe," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe he really does want this. Maybe I was just blind, a fool." Chloe pulled the car over to the curb and turned to face her. "No," she said, her eyes burning with conviction. "Do not let her get in your head. That's her greatest weapon. She makes people doubt their own reality. But you know what's real, the baby you're carrying, the love you and Julian shared, the way his face lit up whenever you walked into a room. That was real. And that's what we're fighting for. Don't you dare give up now." Eleanor nodded, wiping away a tear. Chloe was right. She had to hold on, not just for herself, but for her child. Meanwhile, a small, crucial act of defiance was taking place at the Atherton mansion. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, was tormented by her conscience. She had seen the way Isabella treated the staff, the cold disdain in her eyes. She remembered the warmth and kindness Eleanor had always shown them. She had heard Isabella's lie to Mrs. Croft about Julian calling her, and it hadn't sat right. Mr. Croft adored Eleanor. He wouldn't break her heart over a crackly satellite phone call. Under the pretense of taking out the recycling misses, Gable retrieved the framed photo of Eleanor and Julian's wedding that Isabella had thrown in the office wastebasket. The glass was cracked, but the image was intact. It felt wrong to let it be thrown away like garbage. She slipped it into her apron, her heart hammering in her chest. Later that night, she found a small, forgotten box of Eleanor's things that had been missed in the purge: a few paperback books, a worn sketchbook, and a small silver locket. Acting on an impulse she didn't fully understand, Mrs. Gable packed these items into a small bag. She didn't know what she would do with them, but she felt a powerful need to save these last vestiges of the real Mrs. Croft. It was a small rebellion, but it was hers. The clock ticked past midnight. It was now Saturday, the wedding day. Thousands of miles away, in a wind-swept, desolate landscape of rock and ice, a geologist named Marcus Thorne was running a final diagnostic on a piece of deep-core drilling equipment when a red light flashed on his personal data terminal, an alert he hadn't seen in 2 years. It signified a Priority 1 override message, bypassing the official company servers. Frowning, he opened the file. His eyes scanned the terse, unbelievable words. J. Croft, urgent. E. Vance is homeless. I. Ricci. Wedding is sat. He read it once, then twice. A cold fury, stark and pure, washed over him. He looked at his watch. Given the time difference, it was already Saturday morning back in the States. "Oh, you conniving witch!" he snarled to the empty, freezing air. He knew Isabella. He knew her ambition had no limits. And he knew with absolute certainty that Julian Croft would sooner cut off his own arm than do what the message claimed. He sprinted from the equipment tent toward the central communications hub, where the project leader, a man loyal to Isabella, was stationed. He knew he couldn't get a message out. But Julian wasn't just his friend. He was the head of the entire operation. And he was just 200 yards away in the geo-mapping yurt, completely oblivious that his entire life was being stolen. Marcus Thorne knew he had to do more than just send a message. He had to break the rules. Julian Croft stared at the seismic readings on his monitor, his mind 1,000,000 miles away. The project was a technical marvel, a resounding success, but he felt a hollow ache in his chest that had grown with each passing day. The complete communication silence from Eleanor was unnerving. He'd been assured by Isabella's daily project updates that all was well back home, that Eleanor was with her mother enjoying a pre-baby retreat and avoiding stress. It made sense, but it didn't feel right. He missed the sound of her voice, her easy laughter, the feeling of her hand in his. The flap of the yurt was thrown open, letting in a blast of frigid Patagonian air. Marcus Thorne stood there, his face grim, his breathing ragged. "Julian, we have a problem, a massive one." "What is it?" Julian asked, instantly alert. "Did we hit a fault line? Is the core unstable?" "It's not the project," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent, as he closed the flap behind him. He held out his data terminal. "This just came through a back channel. You need to read it. Now." Julian took the terminal. His brow furrowed in confusion. He read the cryptic message from a C. Davies ESQ. His blood ran cold. The words seemed to swim before his eyes, nonsensical and horrifying. Homeless, assets frozen, divorce, wedding, Saturday. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's a prank, a corporate sabotage attempt." "Is it Julian?" Marcus asked, his gaze steady. "Think. Hasn't Isabella been a little too eager to keep you in the dark, to protect you from distractions? Hasn't she been the sole gatekeeper for all communications? When was the last time you actually spoke to Eleanor?" The horrifying truth crashed down on Julian with the force of an avalanche. The flimsy excuses, the reassurances, the power of attorney he had so cavalierly signed at Isabella's urging. It was all a meticulously constructed cage. He had been so focused on his work, so trusting that he had walked right into it. She said Eleanor went to her mother's. He stammered the words, tasting like ash. She said the signal was too weak for voice calls, that text only was safest. She's been lying to you, Julian. About everything, Marcus said. It's Saturday morning back home. The wedding. It could be happening right now. A primal roar of rage and despair tore from Julian's throat. He wasn't just a fool. He had been a willing pawn in the destruction of his own life, in the suffering of the woman he loved more than anything. He grabbed the sat phone, the one Isabella had assured him was for outgoing emergencies only. He dialed Eleanor's number. A pre-recorded message stated the number was no longer in service. He tried his lawyer. The same. His bank. His access was denied. Isabella had cut him off from the world, leaving him stranded at the bottom of it. The project leader Henderson, he's Isabella's man, Marcus warned. He won't let you use the long-range comms or the helicopter. He'll say it's a breach of protocol. Julian's eyes, which moments before had been filled with confusion, now hardened into chips of ice. The brilliant, easygoing engineer was gone, replaced by a man galvanized by fury. Then we won't ask for his permission, Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. What followed was a blur of calculated chaos. Julian, the head of the entire project, strode into the communications hub and, citing a critical equipment failure that required immediate consultation with the manufacturers in Germany, demanded Henderson hand over the multiband communication override codes. Henderson, flustered by Julian's unexpected and commanding presence, hesitated for only a moment before complying. While Julian worked the comms, Marcus went to the helicopter pilot, a grizzled ex-military man named Carter. He didn't spin a lie. He told him the truth, man to man. He told him about Julian's pregnant wife and the corporate takeover. Carter, who had little love for the condescending Henderson, and the icy Miss Ricci, listened, took a long drag from his cigarette, and gave a slow nod. Fuel tanks are full. The bird gets mighty restless sitting on the ground. Within 30 minutes, Julian had managed to get through to his personal pilot in Punta Arenas, ordering his private jet to be fueled and ready for an immediate non-stop flight to California. He had chartered a military-grade transport to get him from the remote project site to the nearest major airstrip. The logistics were a nightmare, the cost astronomical. He didn't care. As the helicopter blades began to whir, Henderson came running out, his face purple with rage. Croft, you can't do this. This is a violation. I'm reporting you to Miss Ricci. Julian leaned out of the open door of the chopper as it began to lift off the frozen ground. You do that, he yelled over the roar of the rotors. Tell her I'm coming home. The long flight back was the purest form of torture. For 18 hours, Julian was trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the sky, powerless to do anything but watch the flight tracker crawl across the map. He used the jet's satellite Wi-Fi to piece together the full extent of Isabella's treachery. He saw the divorce filings, the transfer of funds, the sale of his personal stocks. He saw the society pages announcing his glamorous whirlwind wedding to his brilliant business partner. It was a perfectly crafted narrative, and he was the silent, consenting groom. His rage was a living entity, a fire in his gut. But beneath it was a chasm of guilt and fear. Fear for Eleanor. Where was she? Was she safe? And their baby? What had this stress, this terror done to them? He had promised to protect them, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. He had handed the wolf the keys to the hen house. When the jet finally touched down in San Jose, it was just after 11:00 a.m. on Saturday. The wedding was scheduled for noon. He sprinted from the plane, ignoring the customs officials who shouted after him, and jumped into a waiting car he had arranged. "Atherton," he barked at the driver. "Drive like my life depends on it, because it does." As the car sped through the familiar streets, Julian Croft prepared himself. He wasn't just going to stop a wedding. He was going to war. The garden of the Atherton mansion had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Hundreds of guests, a veritable who's who of Silicon Valley's elite, were seated in elegant white chairs. A string quartet played softly, their music weaving through the scent of thousands of white orchids. At the end of the aisle, under a magnificent floral archway, stood a nervous-looking officiant and a radiant Isabella Ricci. She was a vision in a couture gown, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon, the enormous diamond on her finger catching the midday sun. She looked out at the sea of powerful faces, all here to witness her ultimate triumph. She had won. The company, the fortune. The man, the status, it was all hers. Julian's mother, Margaret, sat in the front row, looking proud and serene, fully convinced of the narrative Isabella had sold her. Isabella's only regret was that Eleanor wasn't there to see it. She had imagined this moment with Eleanor watching from the street, a pathetic, defeated figure. But she hadn't been seen since that first day in the rain, and for that Isabella was grateful. A public scene would have been distasteful. "And now," the officiant began, his voice warm and sonorous, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two people whose partnership in business has blossomed into a partnership for life." At that exact moment, at a quiet side entrance to the estate, Eleanor Vance took a deep breath. She leaned on Chloe for support, her hand resting on her belly. She wasn't wearing rags. Chloe had made sure she looked dignified, dressed in a simple but elegant blue maternity dress. She wasn't here to scream or cause a scene. She was here to stand her ground. "You don't have to do this, Ellie," Chloe whispered, giving her hand a squeeze. "Yes, I do," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. "I need to look that woman in the eye. I need to stand in my own home one last time. For me, for my baby." They had no grand plan. They simply intended to walk in, to bear silent witness, to force the guests to see the pregnant wife who was being erased. They expected to be immediately and forcibly removed, but it was a gesture they had to make. As the officiant continued with his platitudes about love and trust, Chloe and Eleanor began to walk slowly along the edge of the lawn toward the seated guests. A few heads turned. A ripple of whispers began to spread through the crowd. Who was this heavily pregnant woman? Isabella saw them. For a fraction of a second, her perfect smile faltered. A flash of pure fury crossed her face before she replaced it with a mask of concerned pity. She gestured subtly to the security guards. "Do you, Isabella, take Julian to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the officiant asked. "I do," Isabella said, her voice clear and triumphant, her eyes locked on Eleanor with cold challenge. "And do you, Julian? Stop!" The voice was not a shout. It was a roar. A raw, guttural command that ripped through the genteel atmosphere like a thunderclap. Every head swiveled toward the back of the garden, and there he stood. Julian Croft. He was not the polished, impeccably dressed groom everyone expected. He was a specter, disheveled and wild-eyed from 36 hours of frantic travel. His suit was rumpled, his hair a mess, his jaw tight with a white-hot rage. He looked like a man who had just returned from the end of the world. He strode down the aisle, his eyes fixed on one person, and one person only, Eleanor. The crowd parted before him as if he were a force of nature. He didn't even glance at Isabella, who stood at the altar, her face a frozen mask of disbelief and horror. He reached Eleanor and stopped, his chest heaving. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, as if to make sure she was real. "Ellie," he breathed, his voice thick with 1,000 emotions. "I'm here. I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she leaned into his touch, a wave of dizzying relief washing over her. Isabella finally found her voice. "Julian, darling, what are you doing? This woman is delusional. She's been harassing me for weeks. Security, get her out of here." Julian turned his head slowly, and the look he gave Isabella was so filled with venom that she physically recoiled. "You!" He seethed, his voice low and shaking with fury. "You did this. You locked my wife out of her home. You froze her accounts. You lied to my family, to my friends, to me." He turned to the stunned crowd. "This wedding is a sham, a lie, built on the foundation of a corporate coup. This woman," he pointed a trembling finger at Isabella, "used my absence and a fraudulently obtained power of attorney to seize my assets and attempt to force me into this marriage. She cut off my communication with the outside world and told me my wife had left me." Margaret Croft rose from her seat, her face pale with shock. "Julian, what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, mother," Julian said, his voice breaking, "is that I have been a blind fool. The meaning is that my wife, my real wife, Eleanor, is 8 months pregnant with our child and has been sleeping in motels while this viper redecorated our home for her sham wedding." Isabella laughed, a shrill, ugly sound. "He's clearly had some sort of breakdown on his trip. He's not well, don't listen to him." "Oh, I'm perfectly well, Isabella," Julian snarled. "In fact, I've never seen things more clearly." He pulled out his phone and pressed a button. A voice recording filled the silent garden, the panicked, angry voice of Henderson, the project leader, confessing under duress to an airline official that he had been instructed by Miss Ricci to block all of Mr. Croft's personal incoming and outgoing communications for the duration of the project. The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. The game was over. Isabella's face crumpled, her mask of composure shattering into 1,000,000 pieces, revealing the raw, desperate ambition beneath. "I did it for you," she shrieked at Julian. "For us. She was holding you back. I made you stronger. You tried to destroy the only thing in my life that has ever mattered." Julian said, his voice flat and dead. He turned to the security chief. "Bill, escort Miss Ricci off my property. She is to be charged with fraud, wire fraud, and about a dozen other things my lawyer will think of. Make sure she doesn't take anything with her. Nothing here is hers." As the guards moved in, Isabella stared at Julian, her eyes filled with a terrifying hatred. This was not how her story was supposed to end. With a final choked sob of rage, she allowed herself to be led away past the shocked faces of the guests, who had been celebrating her just moments before. The garden was silent, save for the soft weeping of Margaret Croft. Julian ignored it all. He turned back to Eleanor, his eyes pleading. "Can you forgive me, Ellie, for being so stupid, for letting this happen?" Eleanor didn't answer with words. She simply collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with the release of weeks of terror and heartbreak. He held her tight, his hand resting protectively over her belly, over their child. He was home. The nightmare was over. The aftermath of the wedding that wasn't was swift and brutal for Isabella Ricci. Faced with a mountain of evidence and Julian's formidable legal team, she was buried in lawsuits. Her corporate reputation was annihilated, her assets frozen, and she became a pariah in the business world she had fought so desperately to conquer. Her reign had lasted less than a month. For Julian and Eleanor, the path forward was far more complex. The opulent Atherton mansion, once their dream home, was now tainted by the memories of betrayal and trauma. They sold it within a month, opting for a smaller, warmer house, nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street. Home, not a statement piece. The first few weeks were painfully raw. Julian was consumed by a self-loathing so deep it was a tangible presence in every room. He had not cheated on Eleanor, but in his mind his negligence was a far greater sin. He had willingly made himself blind and deaf, prioritizing his ambition over his family's safety, and it had nearly cost him everything. "How could I not see what she was?" he would ask Eleanor late at night, his voice thick with shame. "How could I have been so monumentally stupid?" Eleanor, in turn, was grappling with her own trauma. The feeling of utter helplessness, of being erased and discarded, had left deep scars. She flinched at loud noises and had to fight waves of panic whenever Julian's phone rang. Trust, once the bedrock of their marriage, was now a fragile, shattered thing they had to painstakingly piece back together. At Chloe's insistence, they started couples therapy. In the quiet, neutral space of the therapist's office, they laid their pain bare. Julian confessed his deep-seated fear of not living up to his father's legacy, a fear Isabella had expertly exploited. Eleanor spoke of her feelings of inadequacy in Julian's high-powered world, a vulnerability that had made Isabella's cruel words cut so deeply. It was agonizing, difficult work, but with every painful admission, a little more light seeped back into their lives. A moment of grace came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, contacted Eleanor. In a tearful meeting at a small cafe, she returned the box of Eleanor's belongings she had saved, including the cracked photograph from their wedding day. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Croft," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I was a coward. I should have done more." Eleanor looked at the items, her sketchbook, her favorite novel, the photo of her and Julian, so young and full of hope. These were the small, intimate pieces of her life that Isabella had tried to throw away. "You did more than enough, Mrs. Gable," Eleanor said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You saved a piece of me." The gesture was a small but powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness could still exist. The true turning point came a month later on a cool autumn afternoon. Eleanor went into labor. Julian was a nervous wreck, but he never left her side. He held her hand, breathed with her through every contraction, and whispered words of love and encouragement. When their daughter was born, a tiny, perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and her mother's calm eyes, Julian held her in his arms and wept. They were not tears of joy, but of profound, gut-wrenching relief. He looked from his daughter's face to Eleanor's exhausted but beautiful, and he finally understood. His legacy wasn't in a company or a mansion. It was right here in this room. This was his foundation. This was his world. They named her Hope. Life found a new rhythm. Julian restructured his company, promoting Marcus Thorne to be his partner and implementing checks and balances to ensure no one could ever wield unchecked power again. He worked less, delegating more, and made it home for dinner every single night. He learned to cook, to change diapers, and to soothe a crying baby at 3 a.m. Eleanor slowly returned to her art. Her studio now a sunlit room in their new house, filled with the scent of paint and the sound of a baby gurgling in her bassinet. Her work took on a new depth, a new strength. The scars of what Isabella had done would never completely fade. They were a part of their story now, a dark chapter that served as a constant reminder of what was truly important. Their love was no longer the easy, untested romance it had once been. It was stronger, more resilient, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the hard work of forgiveness. One evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, Hope asleep in Eleanor's arms, Julian took her hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" she asked. "For not giving up on me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For being strong enough for both of us." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, the familiar weight of it feeling like home. "We're strong enough for anything now," she said. And looking at the family they had fought so hard to rebuild, she knew it was the truth. Eleanor's journey from the rain-soaked gates of her stolen life to the warm porch of her new home is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It's a story about how quickly a perfect life can be shattered by greed and manipulation, but also about how the power of truth, loyalty, and a love that refuses to die can rebuild it stronger than before. They faced the ultimate betrayal, not from a stranger, but from someone they trusted, and fought their way back from the brink. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? How would you fight back when the entire world is telling you you've already lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this incredible story of survival and redemption. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story of justice and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life dramas that will capture your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.